Good evening and welcome back to Sports Talk ATL. I am Chase Earl, joined by Alex Lord. We got a lot of Falcons to break news. Albert Breer released a fantastic article that I highly suggest you check out, kind of giving you the background story of what went on through the Kirk Cousins negotiations and how he ended up in Atlanta, along with some other nuggets that we are going to discuss. We're going to talk about some post first wave free agency needs, but we're going to start off with the Braves because their 26-man roster on March 19th, 9 days before opening day, didn't seem like they had a lot of questions because they pretty much opted everyone. They have 28 players in Major League camp right now. Two of those guys are going to the 60-day IL, so they already have all 26 guys 9 days before free or 9 days before the start of the season on the roster. They decided on Forrest Wall. They're going to give him an opportunity. We talked yesterday about Ronaldo Lopez winning that fifth starter spot. The bullpens, the last three spots are going to be Jackson Stevens, Tyler Matzik, and Dylan Lee. Luis Guillorme is going to take that utility player spot over David Fletcher, who goes to Gwinnett. Anything that really surprises you here, Alex?
Not really. In terms of the bench roles, that boiled down to who had options. Forrest Wall looked really impressive in the spring. So what are you going to do? You're going to give him the first crack at it because he certainly earned it. He was by far the best, in terms of performer in the spring for that bench role. So nothing too surprising. We all thought it was going to be Ronaldo Lopez. Maybe a little bit of Jackson Stevens and Tyler Matzik, and Matzik looked a little bit better. He's still sitting lower in terms of his fastball than when he was at his best during that 2021 run, a few miles an hour, I think. And Dylan Lee too. So you said it maybe weeks ago, maybe a month ago, that I thought they would for sure start on the IL. It didn't have to be a 60-day stinter. It could just be a smaller one. So I guess they're going to give those guys the first crack at it. But again, I think there's so much depth. I said this yesterday. There's so much depth on the pitching staff, both the rotation and the bullpen, that what you're seeing right now is strictly for roster management purposes to a certain extent, where we're gearing up to just kind of figure out who the 2024 Atlanta Braves are. It's not necessarily about putting your best foot forward on the first day. It's about, figuring everything out for the last day, for October, and figuring out what's the best combination, particularly on the pitching staff for October. So maybe the bullpen's a little bit surprising, but I think everything was pretty straightforward, especially with the Duvall signing. That really solidified everything else.
Yeah, I think Dylan Lee and Tyler Matzik did a good job of kind of winning those spots. I know Matzik, I don't know if we're ever going to see 98, 99, 100 mile per hour Tyler Matzik. That may be a thing of the past, which is obviously unfortunate because that's what we remember what he was at his best. But even sitting 93, 94, maybe touching 95 at times, which he was this spring, he had a lot of success. I mean, he was striking guys out. So, maybe he has to approach things a little differently moving forward if he wants to stay in the bigs and be a permanent reliever, or at least anywhere close to as good as he once was. But a lot of pitchers have to do that, and he's still throwing mid-90s from the left side. That's valuable, especially when you're talking about a guy who's your seventh or eighth reliever. I thought Dylan Lee, after hitting like 89, 90, started hitting more like 91, 92, which is where he was when he was at his prime. So it seemed like those guys got healthier and started to build up some strength, which is why it seems like they're confident and using those guys. But as I wrote about when I talked about these 26 guys, it really is an open competition that's going to extend well into the season. It's going to be a rotating. You're going to see guys like Jackson Stevens maybe get DFA'd. Maybe he goes to Gwinnett and accepts that. Same thing with Matzik and Dylan Lee. If those guys struggles, maybe they just get a phantom IL stint, whatever it is. There's going to be opportunities for the Ken Giles, the Ray Kerrs of the world, obviously the Bryce Elders, AJ Smith-Shavers, Hurston Waldrops of the world. So it's an open competition. Right now, it makes the most sense for these guys on the roster. All of them did a pretty good job in spring, so there was nothing glaring that made it obvious to be like, oh, we need to start Dylan Lee or Tyler Matzik on the IL. We need Ronaldo Lopez in the bullpen. So everything just kind of worked out where everything performed well, and they went with the 26 guys that made the most sense from a roster management perspective.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. And I think, in terms of even just benefiting the bullpen, a six-man rotation is something that's got to intrigue the Atlanta Braves because something has to be different. Pitching injuries are up, and whether it's the velocity or the pitch clock, pitching injuries are up, and we have an old staff. I mean, Chris Sale, Charlie Morton are no spring chickens. Max Fried's dealt with injuries. Spencer Strider is such a force that, like, his body is taking a toll. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. I don't care how much he stretches. It's taking a toll, and obviously we all hope he's healthy. But I was just thinking of this, that a six-man rotation probably helped the bullpen too, and it's certainly going to help your rotation. That's got to be in the cards for the Atlanta Braves this season, right? I mean, it's got to.
I think the issue with six-man rotations is a lot of those guys have such planned schedules that they do things that maybe they take a complete rest day on the day after. The second day they toss a little bullpen. Like, they have such strict schedules that a lot of these guys, creature of habits. You're talking about 40-year-old guys that have been in the league for 20 years. Like, they don't want to deviate from that path. And especially earlier in the season. Now, I'm not disagreeing with you. Later in the season, I think especially if guys like Chris Sale get up there in the 120 innings, don't have any injuries, or pitching well and stuff like that, it makes more sense because you don't have as many off days. To start the season, you have an off day like every week. So, like, we have an off day after our first game. I always hate that the MLB does. It doesn't make any sense. We start on a Thursday. Why isn't it just a Friday, Saturday, Sunday? Makes no sense to me. But because you have so many off days the first month of the season, now you're talking about guys getting 6-7 days of rest before they're making those starts. So they don't really need a six-man rotation to begin the year. But later in the year, I definitely think. Now let's talk about the Spencer Strider. He has now officially been named. This is crazy to me. I'm telling you, I've never seen a roster set in place and everything just like set in stone, where there were actual legitimate questions, legitimate competitions, and the Braves are just like, no, we got our 26 guys. We have our opening day. Spencer Strider's getting the ball. I love this for a couple reasons. First of all, it's not a big deal. Second of all, I don't think Max Fried's going to be offended of it. He sees Spencer Strider. He knows he's the most talented pitcher on the staff. But I think it's exciting because it is a little bit of a passing of the torch. Now, I'm not saying this isn't going to mean anything in his free agency or anything like that, but it is a little bit of a passing of the torch, giving Spencer Strider kind of that, like, hey, man, you're the guy. You're the face of this rotation. You're the best pitcher in baseball. Not only that, though, he has carried himself in such a way that I think has been very admirable. Just his competitive, the things he said, the World Series or bust, the confidence, the competitiveness he has. He wants that ball. It may not be too important, but I think that's a big deal to him to give him that ball in Philadelphia, right? A place where people think he has these horrors, which is not really the case. If you go look at his number against the Phillies in the regular season, they're absolutely insane. He's like 9-0 with a 1.8 ERA and a 14 K9. And even in the playoffs last year, he didn't pitch poorly against him. The Braves just didn't hit. So I love the idea of sending him to Citizens Bank Ballpark that first game. Zach Wheeler, send a message, set the tone for the season. I like that.
I'm going to push back a little bit. I will say, when I was in Northport for spring training a little bit, it was clear Max Fried's not a vocal guy. Charlie Morton is not a vocal guy. So when like Spencer Strider came out and, like you said, World Series or bust, and just being that vocal leader, that is something that this rotation needs. I don't disagree with that at all. He's clearly shouldering, and it started last year. It started when we lost to the Phillies last year. He kind of was like, we got to be better. This is unacceptable. He was already started. This whole offseason, he's clearly starting to work on his craft. He's clearly taking the next step intangibly to be that face of the franchise guy. I have no ifs, ands, or buts about that. I totally agree. The fact of the matter is, as you said it, it doesn't matter. It's not going to matter to Max Fried. But in my mind, the whoever gets the ball in game one of the World Series or the NLCS or the NLDS, that matters. Spencer Strider, no question. I don't care. Depending on, obviously, if everybody's on the same rest, it should be Spencer Strider. No ifs, ands, or buts. He's the ace of the staff. He's the best pitcher in baseball, arguably, especially with Garrett Cole out. But you said it. It doesn't matter. This is like the Queen of England. It's just a face. It's nothing. It doesn't mean anything. So you might as well have given it to the guy who's the longest tenured Brave, who very well could be playing in his last season with that jersey on. I think it's not like he hasn't been the guy in years past. How many opening days has he started? 3 or 4 in a row or something like that?
Yeah.
So what is the, I get what you're saying, but I'm making a big deal out of it for no reason, but this is just who I am. I don't see the big deal in giving it to Max Fried. Spencer Strider's under contract till what, 28, 29? He can have the rest of them. It's crazy to me.
But I think you make the point when you say the game one starter, and obviously we're 6 months away from this.
But you said it. Max Fried knows. Max Fried knows.
The game one starter is Spencer Strider. Everybody on this team, everyone around the league knows who the number one starter on this staff is, knows who the most talented, the hardest player to hit. And I think if everybody knows that, you're giving it to the right guy. And I don't think Max Fried should know that. And I think obviously
Max Fried cares. Max Fried obviously doesn't care.
No big deal. But I do think it is a good because I think like a lot of Braves fans, they were thinking like you, oh, Brian Snitker, older manager, this is what he's going to do. Like he's just going to give it to the Max Fried, give it to the veteran, seniority type of thing. Well, I like the idea that as much as Brian Snitker is kind of this older manager, and that stuff definitely plays a factor in a lot of his decisions, he can also peel back a little bit, take a look at the actual situation, realizes, hey, it's Spencer Strider's time. This is a guy who's got a great chance of winning the NL Cy Young, the overwhelming favorite to win it. He's the best pitcher in baseball. He's done everything right from, a preparation, a leadership standpoint to kind of take that mantle. And I think I really do respect Brian Snitker for this decision, because I think he actually looked at it from not just seniority and stuff like that. He looked at it from a little bit more of a different perspective of who's the most deserving guy right now. And to me, as much as it doesn't matter, I think it does send a good message to your team, and you set the tone. Now, obviously, we go out there and get blown out in Philadelphia with Spencer Strider on the mound. You already know it's going to happen, right? It's going to be a free-for-all. Oh, my God, why would you start him in Philly to start the season? Spencer Strider's not that good, blah, blah, blah. You know that's going to happen. But I think he embraces that pressure. I think he's going to love that moment. And I think it's important to him. And I think it sends a good message to him about who they expect him to be moving forward. So I really do like this move. I didn't expect it, but I like it that much more because I didn't expect it.
I am arguing just to argue. I am just doing that. But I'm not just lying through my teeth. Like, I do believe the things I'm just saying there. I just so happen to believe some of the things you're also saying. Like, I do think Spencer Strider deserves it. But I also think, we all know what's going on. Like, why are we trying to pretend it's not? I don't know. I'm not saying Brian Snitker's doing that. I just think it's such a meaningless thing to get the opening day start. I don't know. I'm going to stop. I'm just saying the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. I think you can make it meaningless. And I think if you give Max Fried the thing, it is meaningless. But I think you are sending a message to Spencer Strider.
I think that's meaningless. I don't think giving it to Max Fried is meaningless, because Max Fried has done so much for this team. And I know what you're saying. It's about what you're doing right now and who deserves it right now. I could argue Max Fried deserves it right now. I mean, we don't know. Maybe just because Max Fried isn't so as vocal as Spencer Strider, or as obvious in terms of he's tooling with his stuff, he's certainly still doing all of these things to be the best pitcher he can be for the season. And he's been doing it far longer.
He's been as consistent as they come. And he's looked really good this spring. That last spring's training start he had against Tampa Bay, he looked vintage Max Fried, and I expect him to be really good. As long as he's healthy, there's nothing against Max Fried that I can say. So I will not argue with that there, which is why I expected him in a lot of ways to go with Fried. But I do not mind this decision at all. And as I said, I kind of like coming up after the break, we're going to get into the inside scoop of the Kirk Cousins signing.